I have a job to do when I'm working with people, and it's, do you feel safe enough to be open and share? And do you feel safe enough to say out loud what you want? Because I want to hear you say what you want. And at a certain point in my career, I realized that I had affected people over the course of time that I was like, I would like to do this on my own.
Welcome to Making Change with Your Money, a podcast that highlights the stories and strategies of women who experienced a big life transition and overcame challenges as they redefined financial success for themselves. Now here's your host, certified financial planner, Laura Rotter.
So I'm so excited to have as my guest today, Julia Babij. She's a career consultant and owner of Purpose Geek Solutions. Great name. Julia believes that everyone has talent and no one is truly lost in their career. Perhaps they just need a little guidance and inspiration to see what they cannot see. So welcome, Julia, to the Making Change with Your Money podcast.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be a guest, Laura.
So my first question, as always, is, Julia, what was money like in your family growing up?
One of the things that I'm hearing these days is that if I knew then what I know now, and also I wish they taught financial literacy in schools. And that's starting to become a thing again. That's going to be implemented in some schools I know in like roughly 2026. But when I was going to school, we didn't have that. I remember my dad taught me how to balance a checkbook. It was fun, and that was pretty much it. And I was, my first job was a supermarket cashier, and that was before the days where you could pay with your debit card. So you could only take cash or check. And I remember saying, I will never pay with anything with a debit card. I will never shop online. That was also in the days when the internet was in its infancy. And now you really can't get away from it. And I guess, never is never say never. But growing up, that was pretty much it. My parents were products of parents who were part of the World War II generation. So it was, I know that my dad's dad was very much save for a rainy day because you don't know when the rain's coming. And so always have a cushion, save as much as you possibly can. And, really give to people in need was another big lesson. Give to people who may not have as much as you have, but, really be conscientious about your work, really be conscientious about what you earn, be conscientious about putting aside what you earn, and be prepared because you don't know when it's going to rain.
Oh, it sounds like you heard that message loud and clear. They didn't hide their worldview. And I love what you said. My husband often says that he married me because I would balance his checkbook. Now it's less important. We can go online and check balances, but I was always like very careful about down to the penny balancing checkbooks.
Yes.
And nowadays I actually participate in a group called My Money Workshop that runs financial literacy workshops for high school age kids, because we have no idea. You're suddenly like launched into the world, and how much should I be spending on rent? How much should I be spending on food? No one ever talks about it. So how are we supposed to know?
So number one, absolutely. And the second point too is I remember when I got into my first big girl pants job. So I was 22, and I remember getting a folder with my retirement account information in it. And I remember thinking at the time, oh my gosh, what do I do? And I started saving for retirement right away. But, because it was one of those, I'm supposed to do this. Now, when you're in your 20s and you're just starting out, you're right. How much goes towards rent? How much goes towards food? How much goes towards going out, and fun? So, what was saved in those first, few years, pretty negligible, but it started, at least saving it. Then what you do with it, that's the funny thing. It's like, okay, well, I saved it. What do I do with it now? And it's just, when you're 22, depending on how you grew up and depending on the financial literacy, you're supposed to do the thing, but what are the next steps after you do the thing to do the stuff? Like, but I want this thing, so it's hard to suss out your priorities when you're not quite sure what your priorities are. It's like, save for retirement. Okay, what are the steps after that? I don't know.
And what does retirement even mean? Like it's sometime like 1,000 years from now.
Yeah, pretty much. It seems like 1,000 years from now. I think even the more, the further you get along in your career path, you're still like, retirement?
Right.
You're never going to retire.
So did you always take for granted, Julia, that you were going to go to college? And what was your family's philosophy around education?
So my father was very strong in education comes first. So I grew up in a blue collar family. I do remember when I think about my first job, I was in high school. So I was a junior, senior in high school. And I always remember him saying, school is your job. That's your first job. And when I wanted to get involved in activities on top of working, just kind of pursue interests, my parents never, there's three of us in the family. So my parents never stopped us from pursuing our interests. But I especially remember my dad saying, remember your education is your first job. And even when I was, I'm an adult, I can make my own decisions, he would always say, education was your first job. So again, in the generation I grew up in, so I always joke and I say I'm a grizzled Gen Xer, and I'm very proud of that. I'm actually surprised I'm wearing color today. Usually it's an all black outfit. So I'm like, yes, proud of my generation.
Yeah, I love the pink color for all our listeners. She's got a great pink shirt on.
But it's funny that, because of the generation I was part of and because of the generation my parents were part of, I really went to college because I thought it was the next step in the thing I was supposed to do. When you graduate high school, you're supposed to go to college, right? And, I think it really is dependent on what it is that you want. And when you're a late teenager, you're really not quite sure. I did know that I wanted to go into the psychology field. I've always enjoyed helping other people. I'm actually a counselor by training. I have a master's in counseling, and I chose to work with adolescents because I felt where that was, and I wanted to help other teenagers understand that they're not alone. And that really came around when it came time for teenagers to really choose their educational path. I would speak with them and go, okay, well, are you sure that's what you want to do? And I know for me at the time, going to college was just something that was in my nature to go, well, this is how you get to the next step. And because I wanted to go into the psychology field, I knew that I had to do that. But for me, I was very strong in, with my parents, since we did grow up in a blue collar family, there wasn't a lot of money to send me to college, but I was very firm in, college was my choice. So I'm going to be the one paying for it. So all of the loans are mine. I started out at community college because I wanted to, pay for the tuition on my own. So I went to community college for 3 years and got my associates first. Then when I finished out my bachelor's and eventually went on to get my master's, all of the loans are mine because that wasn't a financial burden that I needed or wanted to put on my parents, because going to college was my choice based on the profession that I chose.
Wow. So that sounds very mature on your part, Julia, that you knew what you wanted to do and that you knew that it was important enough to take the financial obligation on yourself. And I'm assuming you also had some jobs to help pay for.
Yeah, I was a commuter, and it was just that was my life. I worked and I went to school. And when I entered into, that first job where I was like, retirement, oh my gosh, I had started that job right before I had got my bachelor's. And, once I got my bachelor's, it took me about 3 years before I decided to go back to school for a master's degree, because my bachelor's is actually in journalism. So I wanted to save every teenager in the world, and I wanted to write for Rolling Stone. So I figured I could do both, right?
I love it.
Yeah, I loved it. So I thought, yeah, that's great. That's a great path. I ended up getting my master's in counseling though, because I was actually working with a nonprofit, and I was able to discover different types of populations to work with. But I did know that if I were to go back for a master's degree, that I wanted to be certain that it was in a field that I was going to solidly choose as something that I wanted to do throughout, the rest of my career. So rather than, graduating with a bachelor's and jumping right into a master's, I wanted to work for a while and really decide, really nail down that commitment that, I'm going to make that financial commitment. If I'm going to make the financial commitment, then I better be sure that I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing. And so I worked for 3 years, figured out that I wanted to work with teenagers, went back to school for my master's, got a master's in counseling with a specialization in secondary school counseling, continued to work for the nonprofit that I was working with, and ended up doing what I originally wanted to do in my first year of graduate school, which was design groups and run groups with teenagers, which is exactly the job that I ended up with. It was fantastic.
Wow. So that job was with the nonprofit.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I always find when I'm about to say that you were lucky, actually, there's no such thing as luck, right? You create your own luck. So you knew what you wanted to do and you pursued it, which is very impressive for a person in their 20s. So how long were you with that organization and what was your next pivot?
So I was with the organization for 9.5 years, and I ended up leaving for a corporate startup with a nonprofit heart. So I thought that was great because, my experience was all a nonprofit. So I'm like, I will never work for corporations. They're emotionally dead. And that's actually not true. And again, that's the not so mature side of being in my 20s. I was like, no. And no, not all corporations work that way. So a
lot of them are, though.
That is true. Yeah. While that is true, I have gotten, you mentioned lucky. I've been fortunate enough to work with corporations that have always had that solid, we care about people at heart at their core, while still learning how corporations work. And I really got a really nice view of building them from the inside out. And I really appreciated that. So now I can understand the nonprofit side and the corporate side. But yeah, I ended up going into a healthcare corporate startup and learned a lot about the healthcare insurance industry, behavioral economics. That's really where I started my corporate training. And we were teaching a business model based in empathy. So it gave me a chance to combine my counseling training with a solid corporate foundation. And I was able to really grow from there. So that was my next pivot. And I was there for almost 6 years and really got a view of how to build things from the ground up and just fell in love with building stuff. It was great.
A couple of questions come up for me. First of all, I just wrote, you said solid corporate foundation. To be quite honest, corporate to me is just a way of organizing and how you pay taxes. So how would you define a solid corporate foundation? Like, what was the learning that you took away?
Understanding the lingo was huge. When you're building something or when you're in corporate, there are certain things like, so one of my favorite examples is that's a lot to unpack. And so certain things that you learn. And it was funny that it was telephonic customer service. And I started out in the telephonic area, and they were working with, people with demonstrated healthcare and counseling backgrounds to work with the client population. And it was a new cutting edge view on healthcare and helping people through their healthcare events. So it was cool to actually, be able to work with the client population. But then I ended up transitioning over to the corporate building side. And I remember some of my first meetings and listening to all of the corporate, lingo going around. And I remember thinking, am I going to have to get an MBA to be able to understand all of this? And that's really what I mean by solid corporate foundation. I think when we think of corporate, we think of larger companies that have been in existence since almost the dawn of time. And they had to start somewhere. They became something based on whose idea, based on whose processes, based on what people, based on what framework. And that's all of what I mean when I say the solid corporate foundation. For me, coming into my first few meetings and going, do I have to get an MBA? And then coming out, a few years later going, no, I did not have to get an MBA. You really just have to learn how things are built. It really leveled the playing field for me. And I started to be able to clearly see that everything starts somewhere and is built somehow. And once I got a solid understanding of that, nothing seemed so scary or daunting or I don't understand this. I'll never understand it. There's the never say never. So it was really cool to see how things are built from the inside out and really kind of changed my career trajectory going forward.
It's interesting. I mean, as I listen to you, I also hear that, of course, when people make the opposite transition from corporate to nonprofit, there's a whole other language and lingo and political system and the way hierarchies work, so it's not unique to corporate to have its own lingo. So how are you bringing your counseling skills exactly? It sounds like you started in one role and transitioned to another. And, what did you like about the newer role? How were your skills evolving?
Oh my gosh, it was just active listening was the hugest thing. And at the time, oh my gosh. So I joined, the corporate world in 2011. So when I was speaking with our client population, again, it was through the phone. There was you had to really listen for what was going on with the person, and you had to listen for tone of voice. You had to listen to what they were asking. You had to listen to what they weren't asking. You had to read between the lines. You had to problem solve. I really learned how to explain a concept that didn't exist and you couldn't see my face. And I had to explain that to you in a way that you were going to understand. And then your friend's going to call, and then somebody else is going to call, and they may not understand the concept the same way that you would, that your friend would, that the other person would. So I had to learn how to explain the same concept in different ways that I knew my client was going to understand, because, from the counseling background, it's really about them. It's not about you. It's about getting somebody what they need when they need it. And I really did find that principle very applicable to whatever portion of an industry I fell into. And, I think when people look at my organization now and go career coaching, and I also, soft skills training, the whole thread of my career has been listening to people, being empathic, because that's just natural, and, understanding what somebody needs and helping them discover the them that they didn't know existed. And so that's how these principles of counseling have really played out. And so when I was a part of that corporation and starting out and really listening to what people needed and being able to explain a concept that they didn't quite know maybe have existed, and with my voice, that's really how that led into the corporate training. So that really got to bring together all of the things, because not only did I understand working with the client population, but then I had to train how to work with that client population to people that we hired after that, in a business model that was based in human empathy and active listening, and training people on not how to have empathy, here, fake empathy. I don't want you to fake empathy. I want you to work with the person where they're at. And those principles of active listening and helping somebody get to where they need to be really kind of blossomed into a love of training, into a love of helping people become their best selves and helping the other people that they're working with become their best selves. So it really snowballed from there. And that's why when I'm working with people now and mentoring them, and I've mentored people throughout my entire career, I've been a leader, I've been a manager, I've been a hiring manager, I've been a people leader, I've been a mentor, I've been a team builder. Everybody really gets the same advice. And I think that's really important, to help people see what they can't see. And that's always been a theme with me. So all of my experiences really snowballed into helping other people reach that ultimate goal.
Thank you so much. I love that. I do think active listening, I've said before in other conversations, is such an under recognized skill. Really, one of the greatest gifts we can give each other is to actually take the time to listen. And I had the experience coming from the institutional side of Wall Street and being an institutional investor, that I would be at industry conferences for financial advisors where people were taking classes in investing, and I was taking classes in active listening and leaving space and asking reflective questions, because to me, the other stuff I already knew and wasn't as interesting as when you're working with individuals, really getting to know them. And it's like you said, not only hearing their questions, but hearing the questions that they're not asking, that they don't even know that they have.
And you're right, give them that space. That's exactly what you said. It's active listening and allowing the space for them to come to their own conclusions.
I am impressed. Is it really true, Julia? You were working for an insurance company, and so there was actually people hired to give empathy and help people, which is always really impressive to me, because insurance companies, I happen to think that we in the United States have one of the worst healthcare. The way that you get insurance through employers, the whole way healthcare is delivered in the United States is so convoluted and much more complex than it needs to be. And so I'm impressed. And this isn't the first time I've heard it, when I hear about insurance companies that are set up to help their clients, if you will, navigate the maze. So you were both originally the one on the telephone helping navigate, and then ultimately training others who were on the telephone?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that is accurate. And we were brand new, and we were an outlier in the insurance space. And we worked with large companies that had self-funded plans. So the large companies, if it was a self-funded plan, the companies are the ones that are paying the claims, rather than paying an administrative fee to an insurance company, say like Blue Cross, let's just say, to be the administrator of those claims. And so when you're working with somebody going through a health event, not only can you work with that population and explain what happened with the claim, so there's the insurance side of it, but at the same time, are you really listening, and why did that claim even happen? And sometimes we're working with the client population to help them through a health event before it even begins. And so it really started to become a healthcare concierge service that, with a lot of insurance companies these days, I'm seeing something very similar. At the time, that didn't exist. And the company we were with were novel. And so now I think I'm seeing a lot more companies going, talk to our nurse navigators, we can help. Talk to our case managers, we can help. We have these programs, we can help. And granted, this may have been because I was new to the insurance industry, back then, but I didn't see a whole lot of that happening at the time. And now it's, let's be honest here, in terms of money, it's beneficial if you're paying the claims to save money on a health event, because an MRI is a lot more expensive than a visit to a primary care physician to figure out if your hand hurts because you sprained it, broke it, or just because, you might have mild arthritis that aspirin can take away, or whatever it happens to be. That's a lot cheaper than if I'm paying a claim on an MRI and you just jump to an MRI. What the second feature of the company was that we had specialists on staff. So we had nurse partners that specialized. We had oncology nurses. We had OBGYN nurses. We had general floor nurses. We had doctors on staff. We had some of really well-known medical directors. We had, top-notch behavioral health care directors that if we weren't sure about, clients' health care direction, we had like a whole team behind us that could help us work through the particular situation where the client really benefited and they found more help than they thought they were going to when they called what they thought was their insurance company. So we contracted, we were the contractor with the large companies. So even if they thought they were calling the insurance company, it was, well, we can explain your benefits, but we're technically not the insurance company, but we're going to help you with all of your healthcare. And it was just a really beautiful side effect and a benefit that these clients happen to have just for working with the company that they were working with. And it was completely free to them. It was awesome.
I love hearing your enthusiasm for the role that you played and for the company that you work for, which
It was
is,
amazing.
not always the case. And I would agree, because I'm aware now, I'm related to someone who is a United Health Group employee who is in a similar role that you're describing. And I don't think it's from, how should I say this? It's not a completely compassionate driven service that they provide. It must save them money by providing access to a kind of counselor that can help them navigate the system, figure out what the right service is, the right provider of the service, etc. So, given how much you respected that company and enjoyed the role, what happened to make you transition from it?
We changed focus, change of leadership, and, corporate happened. So my position was essentially eliminated. And it was perfectly fine at the time. There was a choice in front of me. I could stay and go to a different position, or I could go and, my life goal is to always work on following my gut more. And I say, your gut knows. And so you really have to listen to your own if you're going to have other people trust your gut, because when they can. For some reason, you don't know yourself. So I knew that at that point I had contributed a lot to the basis of the company, and wherever it was going to grow, it was going to grow, and whatever it needed to be, it was going to be. But I knew that I had contributed what I needed to contribute to the company. So I decided to leave on, with good grace and with pride, and knowing that, I helped maybe build this incredible startup that had a really cool concept attached to it, and ended up going back to nonprofit. And so, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
But
back to the old lingo, or was it new lingo?
What was really great about that was understanding how things are built from the inside, and really coming back to nonprofit with that lens, because with nonprofit, you're always building. And so, it was really cool to be able to say, aha, now it all makes sense, and really combine that experience. And I think that combining that experience really does help, benefit anybody you're going to be working for, after that. And after nonprofit, that's when I ended up pivoting back to corporate startup. That happened to be financial wellness, actually. Yes. And the CEO of the healthcare startup that I was with is now currently the CEO for a financial wellness company, where it's the same sort of concept, but with finances. So working with larger companies and providing financial wellness assistance to people who work with those companies. And so when the client population calls in, you have a financial assistant to help navigate the system with you, because we're talking about, we wish we had financial literacy in schools. And we're just like, yeah, we didn't have that. And so now you're in a career and you didn't have financial literacy. What are you doing with your money? And so we have financial assistants and certified financial planners on staff at that particular startup, that if a client calls in, again, because you're a member of the company, free of charge, and they help you with your financial wellness, rather than living paycheck to paycheck, or maybe saving a little bit more, or even just talking about having one financial goal. We have, people on that staff that can talk you through that. So it's a pretty cool concept. So financial wellness.
I mean, I often say, when I met my husband and I looked at his, tax deferred retirement account, and he had it I mean, this is years ago. It was in a money market fund. I said, wait, it's like your retirement money. You're like not even 30. This should be invested in risk. But he had no concept and nobody to talk to and no one to tell him what to do with it. So yes, it's very needed. And I'm seeing more and more of that, of companies provide someone that you can work with to help you actually decide how to invest your tax deferred account and perhaps how much to put away. I did write down to question when you said, as you transitioned first to the nonprofit, you took that experience. Now, you did say that one of the through lines you've seen in your different roles, Julia, is active listening. But when you say you took that experience, can you be more specific again of what you brought, what learning you brought to the nonprofit and then perhaps to the next?
Absolutely. I think when I went back to the nonprofit, that's where the mentoring really solidified. But when I speak about that experience, it was the experience of understanding how things are built and understanding, things that are built from the inside out. And especially in nonprofit, you're always building new programming, new grants, accountability. You're in a nonprofit, you're working your nonprofit. So you're working with funding, you're working to get funded, and new funding can often come with a really innovative programming. So you may get a grant from the government that, will have you just, as just a random example, but maybe building a cooking program for teenagers, maybe building a financial literacy program for teenagers because they don't have it at school. And it's an after school program because you're the director of a library. It's a nonprofit organization. You have a grant to do that. So you may have a grant for that particular method, but you may have a grant for something else that has to do with the community or another program that you're going to bring into the library. So you have grants that are working at the same time that are providing your funded, but the funding is very specific to the program and to what you're trying to achieve. So you're always building. When you're writing a grant, you're looking at the request for proposal and thinking about what you can contribute to that request for proposal that will get the program funded and help bring the program to the community. That's really the end game right there. And hopefully, if you do really well, you get funded again. Right? So, and then eventually you can become the cutting edge leader in that world. But whereas in corporate, I think especially with startup or especially with funding, you're looking at investor groups, you're looking at venture capital, you're looking at enterprise. Whereas with nonprofit, it's you and it's grants and it's programs and I'm building this thing this year, but I might build this thing this year. And if we get funded again, I want to add on to this thing. And so when you come back to nonprofit from a corporate startup, you're like, aha, and now I understand how things get built because, the corporate I came from didn't just exist. It was based off of an idea and we watched it grow over time. But we, those of us that were there, we had a large hand in building out what that looked like at the time. So, when you go back to nonprofit, you're like, now I understand that when you get a grant, this program has to be built. And what are the processes around it? How are you going to train people around it? How are you going to hire staff for it? What staff are you looking for? And so you really are building a program from inception to delivery to reporting to longevity. And so that's what I mean when I say I took that experience of building from the ground up. And it's a fabulous experience, I will tell you.
I love hearing this. So I've been involved now. I'm probably 7 years or so into it with an organization called Impact 100 Westchester. Impact 100s are actually all over the country. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but every woman who becomes a member contributes $1,000. At its peak, we had $350,000 to grant. I think this year, because of COVID and other things that shifted people's giving, it's maybe $250,000. And we would fund transformational grants. And I really got to know nonprofits in the industry and exactly as you describe. And one of the things I've learned, which is a topic for a whole other conversation, is that nonprofits really want operating grants. And everybody always wants to give transformational grants. You want to see how you help fund a new program or help purchase a new facility or something. And the nonprofits are, great, but I'd also like just some money to continue to pay salaries and keep the lights on.
How do you keep the lights on?
So actually,
those programs do not get built.
So this year, actually, Impact 100 has decided there's always, finalists, and some finalists get the large grant and some finalists get the smaller. And we've made the smaller grants larger because those come with no strings attached, no check-ins as to how the project is going. It's like, just here's the check and you can use it. So it's been very interesting for me to get to learn more. And this conversation is helping. As you've described this building and programming, what would you say, Julia, as you now transition to talking about your own coaching practice, what you enjoy doing the most, what comes easiest to you and what you really enjoy? Because I'm assuming you didn't wear all the hats of writing the grants and putting together the programs and hiring the staff, or maybe you did, but you enjoyed.
I did.
Sorry to hear that. Then maybe
not the writing the grant part. No, actually, no, I honestly loved all of it. The part that I love the most, and I think that's why that's the large part of my current practice now, and why I even decided to start it was coaching and mentoring the team that I had. We got along really, really well, and it was just such a great team. And then I ended up, mentoring staff members from other teams that, one in particular, I remember that we still talk to this day, but I didn't even realize that I took them under my wing. But it was just, the things that became apparent to me in my career up to that point that I had learned over the years was just kind of information that I was sharing with them. And they're doing fabulous right now. And when I first started working there again, they called me mom, and I'm like, yeah. And then now they have kids, and I call them my grandkids, and it's great because they still call me mom. But it was I loved just working with the team and mentoring them and seeing where they are today, and knowing that we all work together and looking at the positions that they're in, and just like their lives is just so cool, So I loved the coaching and mentoring and the leadership, and helping people understand that leaders do listen, and that we are here to guide. And, when somebody would tell me, I'm going to apply for this position, I'm like, good, I don't want you here. I want you to get promoted. And I've always been that way as a leader. I'm like, I don't want you on my team very long because I want you to get promoted. If in fact, that is your goal. If you want to get promoted, I will help you do that. I'll miss you, but if you want to further yourself, then let's go. I'm in. What do you need my help in? So that was that. And I also really loved training. I loved writing training. I loved designing training. I loved delivering training. Because at the same time, again, you get to coach and mentor large groups of people all at once. And if somebody walks away from that training feeling or knowing something that they didn't know before, cool, then I've done my job. But also, did you feel like you contributed your expertise without feeling judged? I don't know everything. And every time I did a training, I'm like, I'm not going to tell you that I do, because I don't. But what I do know is that you know something. And so it was just always, I loved creating that environment where people felt safe to share, because I very firmly believe that everybody has expertise to bring to the table. And, just because I'm standing at the front of a room and talking to a PowerPoint doesn't mean that you don't have experience in this. And I want to know, I want to hear about it. So that was all of what I really loved. I realized, there's a certain time in your career where, I've always been one that I work very well with benchmarks. And so if I went all the way back to the beginning of my career, what you don't know is what you don't know. And so by the time I decided to start my own gig, I'll call it, I had learned so much and had worked with so many people. And the feedback that I consistently got was, I still remember your training. Like there was somebody, and this was years ago, but it's still, and I still every now and then I'll check in with this person. And I'm like, thank you so much for that comment. But it was a class that I trained back at my first startup. And I think it was like 2015, 2016. And as I was, leaving that organization, they had said that they watched me in training and they thought, I want to be like her. And this was a very quiet participant, but I knew, like, I could see what was going on in their head. And like, I would try to draw them out as much as possible because I'm like, you're going to be awesome. And from most recently, I do believe that they're going for a doctorate in education. But, getting comments like that really just, I don't even know how to describe it in words, and most of the time, of course, like, we all suffer from imposter syndrome, right? And my response is always, this loud girl in the front of the room, really? Are you sure? That kind of thing. But it's just, I have a job to do when I'm working with people, and it's, do you feel safe enough to be open and share? And do you feel safe enough to say out loud what you want? Because I want to hear you say what you want. And at a certain point in my career, I realized that I had affected people over the course of time that I was like, I would like to do this on my own. Like, I know how to build stuff and I know how to work with people. And I wanted to be able to devote the time to find more people that felt that they were stuck and help them to realize that okay, let's be honest. Yeah, you may be stuck right now, but can we get you to a spot where you don't feel as stuck? You may still not know what you want to do, and it is not my job to tell you what to do, and it's not my job to find you a job. You're going to be doing a lot of the work, but you may need someone to hold your hand, or you may need a guide, or you may need someone to go, yeah, there's a reason why you did that. Yeah, it's completely understood. Yeah, you know what? I hear your frustration. I hear that you're frustrated. Can I give you feedback on a couple of themes that I heard as you were telling me that story? Or, yeah, you're stuck right now, but you're not going to be forever. So let's think about, what you may want to do, or it might not be the path, that kind of thing. And so just being able to create the space to work with more people in that capacity. I always told people, like, I'm just out here building empires. And it became apparent to me that, at this point in my career, why don't I just build my own? So give it a shot.
And what I'm hearing from you, Julia, is that you have a way of creating a safe space.
It's what I enjoy the most. Yeah.
So as we get to the end of our conversation, Julia, how has your definition of success, and maybe even financial success, shifted, as you think about your why and your purpose?
Financial success. I would say, do you have the money to cover your needs? What do it's not, I am never going to drive a Rolls Royce. I know I should say never, but I'm never going to drive a Rolls Royce. But when you talk about financial success, are you?
And was that ever anything you actually aspired to?
Oh gosh, no.
Right. So I'm actually curious from how your aspirations may have shifted.
I know personally for me, I want to know that I'm set up for the future. I want to know that I'm putting my resources into the right buckets. I had a friend once say, future, that's for future Julia, protect her. And they were talking about finances. I thought that was hysterical. And I would say, when I was in my 20s, going back to the example of, I contributed to my retirement, but, really how much? I think, that has shifted into, I want to make sure that, I'm set up decently for the future, that I can retire if I want to, and to really, really pay attention, stick to a budget, be conscious about income versus what's going out, and really just being smart about finances, being smart about putting yourself, we do not know what's going to happen to us tomorrow. Put the will in place. Yeah, I know it's a bummer, but it's freeing and terrifying at the same time. Put the will in place. And one of the things how my financial picture has shifted is I want to make sure that if something were to happen, are the people that are involved in my life, make sure that they're not burdened as well. And so, I think the past few years have taught a lot of us that we do not know what's going to happen tomorrow. We want to make sure that, our loved ones or those that are left behind, aren't struggling or confused as to how to manage your estate if something were to happen to you. So you want to be able to leave as much direction as possible. So it's really thinking about the future and thinking about those that, those that are with me, that, making sure that they're okay as well.
I love that. It's sort of a mature view. What financial success is. So, Julia, is there anything else you'd like to make sure that you say before we end our conversation?
I just really, I enjoyed this conversation, and I love that you are finance with a heart. I absolutely love that. And, when you had said you were taking trainings on active listening, and I'm like, oh, do tell, I think doing a podcast is, you are the chief of active listening. So, it's just a really wonderful thing. So it's really nice to be a part of, somebody who has a really unique spin on finance, and you're really practicing what you preach. And I love it. I think it's great.
Thank you so much, Julia. So nice to get to know you. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Julia Babij, owner of Purpose Geek Solutions. And I'm going to share some of my takeaways. First takeaway, before you make a large financial commitment, make sure it's something you truly want to be doing. Julia was considering studying for her master's in counseling. Before she made the financial commitment towards her graduate education, she worked for 3 years with a nonprofit that provided mental health counseling. She wanted to be certain that it was a field that she was going to solidly choose as a long-term career. My second takeaway: recognize how the skills you've developed in previous roles are applicable to your next position. According to Julia, active listening was a big part of her skill set as a counselor. She had to listen for tone of voice. She had to listen for what clients were asking and what they weren't asking. She had to explain a concept one way for one client, and then maybe a completely different way for another client. Those principles, those soft skills, were transferable as she took on the new role of corporate trainer, and then to her current role as career coach. Finally, your gut knows. Julia shared that one of her life goals is to follow her gut more. She described enjoying her years in a corporate training role, and then knowing in her gut that it was time to leave and go back to the nonprofit world with good grace, pride, and the knowledge that she had contributed all that she could contribute. Julia listened to her gut again when several years later, she left her leadership training role to start her own practice as a career coach and consultant. Are you enjoying this podcast? Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss next week's episode. And if you're enjoying the show, a rating and review will help other women just like you to find it. And I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Making Change with Your Money. Certified financial planner Laura Rotter specializes in helping people just like you organize, clarify, and invest their money in order to support a life of purpose and meaning. Go to www.TrueAbundanceAdvisors.com/workbook for a free resource to help you on your journey. Disclaimer, please remember that the information shared by this podcast does not constitute accounting, legal, tax, investment, or financial advice. It's for information purposes only. You should seek appropriate professional advice for your specific information.